the units and levels of language. And I'll just put a box around one unit, which is the title of my talk. And now another box around another unit within that, which is a word inside that title, and then another box, which is a letter inside. So those three levels all obey the three laws of holon partons, which I will get to soon. So this talk is also inspired by Klaus's great table, is out also about three laws of language, which I think some linguists have not noticed yet, Chomsky, Pinker, etc. And in fact, they seem to be laws of all domains in culture. So this is from the new meta-science of evolutionary culturology, which incorporates systems science, cybernetics, and information science, some other disciplines as well, but we'll get to that. And it was inspired by Klaus's great table. I really like those 4 different approaches to language, 4 different views. And that's me down the bottom, JT Velikovsky from the Newcastle School of Creativity. And on the right here, we have a diagram. Evolutionary culturology is at the top. I guess everyone can read the writing okay?
Yes.
Great. And if you look on the left, it says philosophy, science, social science, and the arts, going up sideways up the left-hand side. So these principles from evolutionary culturology unite all these domains down through anthropology, sociology, psychology, biology, chemistry, physics, astronomy, geology, mathematics, philosophy, and systems philosophy. On the right, you'll see the 2 arrows, and that's showing that holon partons, these units and levels of culture, go all the way through all those domains. So, as I say, this was inspired by Klaus's great table. My main focus is just on that second category, sorry, third category there, on the units, linguistic units. And this scientific theory of information applies to all 4 of those categories. So the abstract, objectivist, individual, subjectivist, etc. And it's a very useful table. Thank you, Klaus. It's not quite as updated as the most recent one. And just down the bottom, I'd also like to throw into the mix, because one of my main interests is applied evolutionary epistemology. I'm always interested in evolution, so the evolution of domains of culture, including language. And I want to thank Jamie and Rafe Champion for bringing up at the Popper conference a couple of months ago, Popper's 4 functions of language, which he got from his PhD advisor, Carl Buehler. And down the bottom there, you can hopefully see the 4 different functions. Buehler identified the first 3. So you have the expressive or symptomatic function, so making a noise such as ouch. And of course, animals make expressive noises, which may or may not be considered language. Number 2, the stimulative or signal function. So perhaps alarm cries or saying to somebody, hey, watch out. It's kind of, or hey, you, it's signaling something. I want your attention, or I want to stimulate a reaction. Number 3, the descriptive function. So that is a car, or that is a cow, or whatever the object might be. And then Popper added the argumentative function, of course, so that we can critique each other's theories, which hopefully we'll do after this. So that's from Conjectures and Refutations, page 397. Thanks again, Jamie and Rafe, for drawing my attention to that. It's very helpful with my applied evolutionary epistemology work. These are 5 previously published book chapters on this science of evolutionary culturology. The first one down the bottom in 2016 was an appendix to my PhD, and then it was reprinted in an encyclopedia of information science and technology, more recently in the Encyclopedia of Creativity, but originally it was printed in Creative Technologies for Multidisciplinary Applications, because it does actually apply to all disciplines and domains in culture. And so, in a nutshell, what is EvCult, or evolutionary culturology? We start with consilience or convergence. So people may be familiar with Ed Wilson's book on the bottom right from 1998, Consilience. More recently, Peter Watson had a great book called Convergence in 2016, talking about how all the disciplines are overlapping and linking up now, so that, and this is clearly obvious in, for example, Jerry's work, where you see physics leading into chemistry, inorganic chemistry, biology, biology leads into psychology, sociology, etc. So that's the largest set, is consilience and convergence of science. Within that, I use systems science and cybernetics. I'm a big fan of Ervin Laszlo's 1972 book, Introduction to Systems Philosophy, which is now out of print, which is very odd. Seems to be continental and analytical philosophy have taken over the public imagination in most of academia. I think it's quite strange that this book is out of print. Hopefully it'll come back in print soon. Within that, evolution in biology, in culture, and in bioculture, because evolution is evolutionary algorithms that occur within systems, whether they're biological, cultural, etc. Within that, applied evolutionary epistemology. So I really like Natalie Gontier's work in this domain. She has a great article in 2012 called Introduction to Applied Evolutionary Epistemology. And in a nutshell, it asks, what are the units, levels, and mechanisms of evolution in biology and in culture? So which ones are the same? Which ones are different? How does systems theory and cybernetics illuminate all this? Within that, it's the science of evolutionary culturology emerges. And on the right there, those are just the years of publication of those 2 great books. So these are the 3 laws of whole-on partons. A whole-on parton is a unit that is a whole, but also part of a larger whole at the same time. So there's a bit of a Gestalt shift there for some people who aren't used to quite thinking of those 2 things at once. So for example, in the title, the T is a letter T, but it's also part of the word the at the same time. And it's the word the is also part of the whole title. So there's actually 3 levels that are all on one level. So the 3 laws are whole-on partons integrate upwards into units on the level, the scale level above. So it's about scale or size or fractal geometry. At the same time, law number 2, these units, these whole-on partons, they compete, and they also do cooperation, and they also do coopetition sideways with units that are on the same scale level. So letters can compete with letters for attention, words can compete with words. So we choose synonyms when we speak usually. We usually just choose one word from a range of words we know that mean the same thing. So that's just one example in the domain of language. Or for example, with letters, you could write PH for the sound F, or you can use the letter F. So There's competition between these units on the same scale levels. And the third law is that holon partons command and control the smaller units on the scale level below, which are inside them. So holarchy partarchies are one very special kind of hierarchy. There's about 10 different types of hierarchies, but this is just one kind of hierarchy, a holon parton. And so here is a picture that Leibniz in 1706 suggested. He said, draw a circle, and then inside that draw the three largest circles you can, and then repeat that forever, recursively. So you can see, if we enlarge this, there could be two more bigger circles sitting beside it. So the question is, are we looking at the whole or are we looking at a part? And you can zoom into smaller scales and see that there are wholes and parts at the same time, all those circles. So that's also a diagram of a system and also a holon parton. Now, systems are holon partons. They are governed by the three laws of holon partons that you see there on the left. So because they have subsystems inside them, and they have subsystems inside them, and units of culture, such as words, numbers, songs, these things are also holon partons. They are structured as holon partons, but they are not systems. So systems have units of culture as inputs and outputs to them. So people learn words and speak words. So learning a word is an input. Speaking a word or a sentence is an output. And then we get cybernetic feedback when somebody hears the sentence we said and they give their own output, and vice versa. So every conversation is a cybernetic system, of course. So that's just one representation on the right there of a holon parton. And these three laws on the left can be used as a magnifying glass or a tool to find the discrete units of culture. For a long time in cultural evolution and many other domains, they weren't able to identify discrete units of culture in any domain in culture, but this basically solves that problem. So this is a busy slide. In the middle there, I'm just going to put a bounding box around one unit on one level of that holon parton. Can everyone see that? I guess everyone can see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep, great. So I'm going to put a letter in there. That's the letter T. I'm going to put another letter, which is on the same level, because this is the level, the scale level of letters. So they obey the three laws by cooperating. They integrate upward into a larger unit. In this case, it's a very simple word, the word it. And so these three laws that you see on the right are operating on all those units and levels at the same time. And we can drill down for smaller scale units. So we see the upwards bar and the side bar of a T, which are being commanded and controlled by the letter T. And same with the I and the dot for the letter I. And of course, this is how machine language optical character recognition works. It looks for geometrical shapes that it can classify into letters so that an algorithm can read a page of text and translate it into the symbols that we know and love of language. And so there's your three laws on a very simple example, but it works on all things in language: letters, words, phrases, morphemes, sentences, paragraphs, discourses, all those units that Klaus mentioned in that great table on the unit level. And so on the left, we also have, you can see down the bottom left is the word letter. So that's one unit and scale level of culture. The three laws apply all the way up. So they integrate upwards to a word. Words integrate upwards into sentences. They integrate upwards into paragraphs. They integrate upwards into a chapter. Chapters integrate upwards into a novel. And a novel may be on a bookcase. It could be in someone's home, or it could be in a library or on a retail store bookshelf. Then the larger unit, the larger whole-on parton is the genre of that novel, whether it's sci-fi or Western or romance. And then we have all novels, all books as one unit of culture using these three laws. And you could go down and you could go sideways with those laws. I just use the integrate upwards to work our way up to the top. So that's just one example of a case study of a novel. And so the average novel on Amazon has 67,000 words in it. So when you hold a novel, you've got one unit of culture in your hand, which is one novel, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone or whatever it may be. But at the level of words, it actually contains perhaps 100,000 units. So many units in one within these three laws of whole-on partons. And then these are a dozen examples of different domains to which these same units, levels, and laws apply. So you can analyze any of those domains: books, cinema, games, jokes, science, myths, conspiracy theories. There's about a dozen examples in my forthcoming book. It has 21, it has those domains and another 10 or so, 21 domains in culture that are analyzed as case studies using, this is one of the tools of evolutionary culturology, but there's actually many, many more, but I just wanted to focus on language, obviously. So in a nutshell, systems are whole-on partons. They obey the three laws. So atoms are systems and they're whole-on partons. Molecules are systems. They're also whole-on partons. Cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, organisms, and then we get to larger units, families, states, nations, the whole globe. And importantly, units of culture are also structured as whole-on partons, even if they are not systems. So anyway, just a useful little tool for finding units and levels of culture. The three laws of whole-on partons. The book URL is down the bottom there. It should be coming out February or March next year. And interested to see what people think of that. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Joe, would it be fair to say that your focus with respect to language is on content rather than the dynamics?
In this talk, yes. In my book, I go into many different aspects of language, including Pinker's different 8 different styles of linguistic address and writing. I don't know if anyone here has read The Sense of Style by Pinker. It has 8 different modes of address. So there's plain writing, classic style prose writing, prophetic writing, of oratorical. I've also been a filmmaker, novelist, TV writer, comic writer. I've made a living, game designer. I've made a living over 30 years out of the written word. So this talk really doesn't have anything to do with style, I would say. It's more just those linguistics units. When I saw Klaus's column with linguistic units, I thought, I bet a lot of people don't know that in information science and technology, we're now using these 3 laws of whole-on partons and writing AIs that can also save time by writing prose for us, and then we can check it and change it and that sort of thing. So did everyone here know about these 3 laws from information science?
Kevin?
I will answer it. So I do know all about them because I got to know JT Velikowski, and I met him just at a Popper conference, and we have been talking since then. And if I may make a plug, there is this guy, Brian Boyd, who wrote a biography of Nabokov, and he's also writing one on Karl Popper. And that is how JT and I bonded in particular. Now, JT, so me and JT, we're getting to know one another. So it's not that we agree or disagree. I'm still trying to find out what JT is doing. And so in that context, I want to ask you a question. I found a book recently, I think by Heinz Pagel, if I remember correctly, and he kind of said that we can use virtuality games to kind of create a virtual representation of the universe as it exists with human beings and text and everything in it. And I think that is what Klaus was kind of problematizing. And I also think, JT, this is what you're trying to do. You're saying this is the way. So you're not problematizing it. You're saying actually this is the way we all should go. We should recreate. We should just recreate everything in virtual space, and then let virtual space make the decisions, or that is what I'm trying to understand in your work. Where does the flesh and blood human being come in, separate from the virtual reality we have been able to create via our interconnected computers?
Wonderful question. Thank you, Jamie. The flesh and blood, I think, comes in here. See how holon biology, units of biology are holon partons. I think there's a lot of terrible information floating around, like conspiracy theories and science denial and terrible ethics. And it's my understanding that humans are holon partons, and we use these holon partons of culture, but presently we don't really, it's not policed very well. Nations don't have a conscience, so all 195 nations are still currently in conflict with wars and competing, and there's poverty and climate change. My solution to that is a little thing called the ethicizer, which is an artificially intelligent algorithm based on the World 3 model from the Club of Rome in 1970s, which of course Club of Remy is a namesake of. Now that we know the units, we can model all 7 billion people in the world, and all the animals and plants, and make sure nobody ever does anything unethical ever again. So yeah, I just think nations and at the level of the globe, I'm very inspired by thinkers like H.G. Wells, Isaac Asimov, Harari, Yuval Noah Harari, who think the globe should be one unified single humanity. And currently, I think humanity treats other members of humanity disgustingly. It's an obscenity. There's wars and there's wealth inequality. The top 1% pollute 20% and own more than the bottom 50% combined. All these things, I think, need a solution from systems theory and cybernetics, which the ethicizer being one good example. I think some humans are good at ethics, but there's the 3 camps. There's deontology and virtue ethics and consequentialism, and they all can't agree. I think you need some sort of big data solution like an algorithm. Isaac Asimov wrote about this in the 50s in a short story called The Evitable Conflict, meaning that conflict is not inevitable. It should be just evitable. We don't need it anymore. So I'd like to see one combined global humanity where everybody's happy and everybody behaves ethically. And yeah, so systems theory and cybernetics, I think, is the way to achieve it. And now we have the units and levels. Why not try it? It could be a video game first. I was a video game designer for 30 years, so that people could get used to the idea on their smartphone and ask it for advice. If they're about to do something, it could tell you if you were about to do something unethical. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Yes, perhaps one more thing. How would your video game help us make a distinction between hackers? Just how would it protect us against hackers? Because I think that's a question you never answered, or maybe you did, but I didn't hear it properly. So if I'm going to trust the video game to solve ethical questions, I need to make sure about who developed it and for what purpose, and what mechanisms are in place to make sure that there is no hacker using it to manipulate my thinking and push my emotional buttons and spin me around. So what sort of protections are you including? Because I haven't seen that in your model very clearly.
Great question. I think you would want to use Ashby's law of requisite variety and have as many people make an ethicizer as possible, then have them have a competition and make it totally transparent so that all information was known at all times. I think that's one of our biggest problems is humans always have incomplete information. But if we had a lot better data, bigger data, we wouldn't be sort of making so many decisions under uncertainty. So if you decide to buy a certain car, the ethicizer would tell you that's fine, but you've just destroyed a couple of football fields in the Amazon rainforest because you're buying a petrol car and not an electric car. And you've also put a couple of villages in Sumatra underwater and people have lost their homes. I think we're not good at thinking globally, but now we are one sort of global humanity. We have to find better tools to be aware of the information so that every single action we take, we understand in a big cybernetic system, you know, chaos theory and complexity, the butterfly effect, anything I do, or as turned up in the chat, you know, every time you Google, it uses the energy of 2 cups of coffee. So every time somebody goes to Google, the ethicizer would say, wait, do you really need to know that? Or, you know, if you went a bit further, we could have chips in our heads so that we don't need to Google, it just does it. It's all uploaded anyway. So I'm sort of very interested in technology and the future. I've always been working in sort of high-tech areas. So sorry if some of these ideas are anathema to some people. Some people get really offended by some of these ideas. I don't mean to cause any offense.
We have 4 raised hands: Jerome, Jerry, Klaus, and Lou. Please go ahead, Jerome.
So I'll start. I guess I'm not offended by any means. I mean, this is an open forum. We're all. I would hope. I mean, I am a Democrat, so I welcome differences of opinion. So I was just writing out some comments, some reflections as you were speaking, and as you were also communicating with Margareta or Jamie. And so thank you, of course, for giving the talk. Politeness. So I would just refer to, I know this criticism from Herbert Gintis of Luhmann and systems theory. He basically, just to put it in a nutshell, other people want to speak, there's no place for the individual in Luhmann's systems theory. Maybe some other people have different views here, but of course, I'd be curious to hear what you'd say to that. And just when you were talking about one unit of culture, that I don't like that style of thinking. Comparing Harry Potter to Stendhal or Shakespeare, may not be really the right way to go about looking at culture. So, what about quality? Are there specific, texts or paintings or other artifacts that are more or less worthwhile? The issue of intentionality, also in communication, I sort of was missing that in your various levels, and what other thing? As to the very last thing you just said, more knowledge may not be better. Some people have said this, like John Elster, who's talked about constraint theory, the idea that restricting the domain of possible actions actually might be better. So maybe not having more information might be desirable. Then the last point here is this very last thing, this program, I forget what you call it, to me smacks of just scientism. And I've heard a lot of people basically who say, you can solve all of life's problems with engineering. So what about this black swan phenomenon and the idea that, things may mutate and change in some unexpected way. And if we humans sort of introduce our flavor or our thinking on what we think would be the best in the future, we sort of preclude nature, from working simultaneously. This idea of having some type of awe before nature or the mystical or whatever it happens to be, the unknowable, letting evolution do its sort of thing. That's a lot of ideas there.
Oh, thank you. That's great, Jerome. Thank you. I don't use much Luhmann myself. I've read some Nicholas Luhmann, but I found some of it to be wrong-headed. That's just my view. Maybe I'm wrong-headed. I much prefer things like Csikszentmihalyi's systems model of creativity and Bourdieu's field and practice theory. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but at the Newcastle School of Creativity, we take Csikszentmihalyi's systems model of creativity from 1988, and we put that with Bourdieu's theory of the field of cultural production. So you have 4 types of capital: economic capital, social capital, cultural capital, and symbolic capital, etc. My PhD goes into 450 pages of detail of that. So that's there if anyone cares. Luhmann may be right that some social systems leave no place for the individual.
Actually, that was a criticism of Luhmann, that in Luhmann, there's no place for the individual.
Sorry. My bad. Sorry. So I've looked at Luhmann and gone, why don't I use this? And it's like, because there's too much in there that I think is wrong. So anyway, that's just me. As you're absolutely right with quality versus quantity. In my book, I have a chapter just on novels. I have chapters on science, chapters on those 21 domains. There are things that are popular, but popular things are not always great, and great things are not always popular. I was lucky to be introduced to great books of the Western world as a child. It was sitting on the home bookshelf, and I used to leaf through it, and I got curious about Darwin and Newton and Dostoevsky and these classic thinkers. And so I do distinguish between popular culture and, Bourdieu talks a lot about this in distinction. There's high art, which is, opera and ballet and the classics, and Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Jane Austen, etc. And then there's 50 Shades of Grey, and 50 Shades of Grey sells a lot better than all the other classic, terrific, mind-expanding books put together. So this is what I'm getting at with the ethicizer. The attention of the globe tends to be very easily distracted, so that if you think of humanity as one big human of the globe made up of 7 billion people, that person is very easily distracted, has ADHD, is very good at explaining away and rationalizing away unethical behavior or ignoring it or turning a blind eye. On the individual level, we have mechanisms to try and solve that, but they don't work very well, and they haven't worked very well up to now. So we need to try something else like big data. So that would also be my answer to your question of more info versus less info. I hear what you're saying. Sometimes we feel like we're drowning in information, but again, the ethicizer is about that. It would filter information. For example, any website or any tweet you looked at, it would have a label saying, this is fake news, read it at your peril. Currently, we've had little efforts by Twitter to, when Donald Trump will tweet some nonsense, it will say, this claim has been disputed. And it's like, wow, that's a really soft way to say that's a lie. This is false. This is not true, which, you know, coming back to Klaus's interesting points about, and Lou, truth versus falsity. A lot of this information is junk information, it's pollution and needs filtering. And us humans are great, but we tend to be more used to hunter-gatherer bands of 150 people, you know, Dunbar's number, we can handle about 150 associates and understanding them and tracking their information. But when you have thousands of friends on Facebook, there's going to be problems with information management, and we just aren't evolving mentally fast enough to cope with that, I think. So we need a bit of help from these other tools. And then to the last point, yeah, this is totally scientism. A lot of people use scientism as a bit of a slight. I love science. And if anything, I'd like to see science become a religion. That's not a popular view, but I don't care. That's just my view. I think you could, I think if the ethicizer, sorry, I think the ethicizer could become a kind of data god, so that if you wanted to be religious, you could ask this all-wise, all-knowing, benevolent figure for advice. And the difference would be, in most religions, the deities are kind of imaginary, or we don't see any scientific evidence. But in this case, you could ask an all-knowing God, because it would have all of Google and all the scientific facts at its disposal. So we'd no longer be in that case where we're just guessing so much and coming to wrong conclusions. So I think big data would be worth trying. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about absolutely everything, but if we don't try it, you know, kind of got to suck it and see, I guess. Anyway, does that answer those 4 great questions?
Well, if I can just respond to the very last thing you said, I think that there is a distinction between making big data or making some kind of program a stand-in for God or whatever it is, and what traditionally or historically has been seen as God or gods, which have been associated with natural forces or fate or things that, you know, are sort of inexplicable. And the idea that one could associate that with something which is, as we all would admit, man-made, of course, it begs a bit of, you know, reasoning. It sounds a bit like science fiction. Sounds like a Kurt Vonnegut novel or something like that. So yeah, just the idea of, you know, actually dissociating anything and everything that's man-made from, say, you know, the all sort of it's getting a little bit late in the afternoon. So the sort of natural processes, you know, that evolution has been employing, of course, is, you know, anthropomorphizing over millions of years. You know, do you understand? Does that make sense? I'm sort of rambling.
Kind of. I actually take, in the book, I take a look at what are the evolutionary algorithms that created biology. And there's a few of them that haven't been discussed much in biological evolution. There's a few sub-algorithms, like the standard view is Darwin's catch-all, which is variation, selection, and heredity. But if you zoom in fractally closer and on different scale levels, there are actually, the order is flipped. It's selection, then variation, and then transmission. Anyway, these laws, these 3 laws of Holon-Partons, seem to have created biology out of inorganic chemistry. And then our tools, our culture, sorry, by the way, I define culture as just as tools. So a word is a tool, a language is a tool for communication, right? Or can be for a lot of things, but usually words and language involve communication, solving problems. And so the thing is, biology has a lot of tools built in, like our teeth are used as tools for cutting, our fingernails or our hands are used for tools, our eyes are tools for seeing. We have 20 senses, apparently, not just the famous 5 of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. there's apparently 20 sensors that we have. So you can detect gravity and you can detect how fast you're moving, you know, if you're in an accelerating car or something like that. Anyway, so biology has emerged as a whole on parton, and then we've made all these units of culture through creativity, you know, so now we have computers and vaccines for COVID. If we didn't have that technology, we wouldn't be able to vaccinate ourselves. So science is really the only way to stay alive. It's my belief. I'm a big believer in Popper's book title, All Life is Problem Solving. So you have the problems of survival, reproduction, if you choose to go that way, happiness, avoiding suffering. And so the avoiding suffering is the big thing where the ethicizer came from. I just see a lot of problems in cultural evolution where conspiracy theories emerge every few months and then people act on them and then they riot and do the January 6th insurrection. That's bad information. So if we can clamp down on the bad information and the bad tools, humanity should have a lot less suffering and also less suffering for the other plants and animals, is my view. So I'm real big on evolution. Does that answer the question?
Let's hear Jerry's question.
Yeah, we can continue maybe bilaterally, sure.
Jerry, you're muted.
Okay, so very interesting talk. The personal presentation certainly was superior to the film presentation that you provided us. So thank you for the additions. The time is late. I just want to explore one question with you. And that was my surprise by seeing the diagram from Leibniz. And if I interpreted your theory correctly, which I may or may not have, I am wondering, are you asserting then in your system of cultural holism that the Leibnizian diagram is sufficient for an ontology for languages?
Not necessarily an ontology for languages. Great question. Thank you, Jerry. No, I take Popper's 3 worlds ontology of ideas, mental processes, and physical products, and I expand his 3-part ontology to 4. So I take processes, the middle one, because as I understand it, Popper published several times on 3 worlds. I've had some good chats with Jamie about this. So world 1 is the physical, world 2 is mental processes, whereby people such as yourself might come up with a new mathematical system like perplex number theory. And then the abstract world of ideas, world 3. And if I understand it right, the prime numbers and all numbers to infinity exist in Popper's world 3. They're already there, and us humans with our mental thinking in world 2 slowly discover these artifacts. They were always there, so this is kind of a Platonic ontology. But I take the 3 worlds of products, which is everything we see, a house and rocks and cars and computers and books. And then mental thinking is cognition and emotion. I add to that physical processes that are not to do with mental thinking. It could be just an oven that you turn it on and it cooks and then you turn it off, or a timer, or a self-driving car that doesn't need a human, etc. So physical processes, or a machine that makes sausages even if there's no human there. And so I expand his ontology to 4 worlds. So I believe with language, for example, there's the idea of all languages and all words within them and all letters and all possible symbols, including mathematical and physical chemical symbols. We slowly discover or converge on the truth in the same way that they're in the great book Creativity in Science by Dean Keith Simonton in 2004.
I understand that part about it.
Yeah.
But Let me just say that it raises a question in my mind, and it has to do with the logic that is promoted, in particular the Leibniz's notion of the principles of sufficient reasoning. This notion would have implications for the use of his diagram. And here particularly, I come across the problem within numbers, well, particularly the atomic numbers, as being logical constants. This is the factual basis of the chemical table of elements. And so I don't see how you can compose things from the lower levels of your descriptions into the higher levels. And I'll just leave that as an open question. It's very theoretical, but it's there as an open question, and the time is late, and I really have to run here very shortly.
Right. Thanks, Jerry. Thank you.
Klaus.
Thank you.
Well, your last sentence gets me into what I had to ask. I think your whole idea of holons, it's not only your ideas, but it is pretty general.
Hold on, partons.
Yeah.
Make sure you
okay.
say, sorry, class.
Holons
Make
and
sure you say
partons,
holon
it's very
partons.
much interchangeable. And to me,
No,
anyway.
No, they're not. They're not.
Okay, let's look.
Holons
Okay.
comes from Kusler, partons comes from Feynman, and this is combining science and the arts. That's very important. Please don't just say one or the other.
Okay. The point is, it leads to a hierarchy of inclusion of higher parts and lower parts. And my question is, who makes this? Now you're making them.
I don't think it does.
No, but let me finish first. For example, words. Well, we have characters, we have words, etc., etc. There are other theories that, for example, they're saying words is the latest invention. We have utterances, we make noises. It's a totally different kind of hierarchy. And then it's now that my question is really, what is the relevance of this? Now, if you talk about biology, the heart, the various organs, they have no reason to object to their categorization and how they are put into hierarchies. As soon as you come to human beings, then it's a question of, will they accept your hierarchy? And there I would say it falls apart, because as a human being, you have your own way of categorizing the world. And there, what I was trying to say is, we enact our own categories. Now, in some sense, they're of course structured by, as I said, the language that we speak, but there are vast differences in how we conceptualize in hierarchies the world. If you think of various kinds of social theories, Marxian theories, it's very different kind of hierarchy than lots of people, sociologists. They make their own hierarchies, and then it's a question of how are they embedded in the actual practices, and then they fall mostly apart if they don't take care of how the individuals that are part of your hierarchies construct their hierarchy.
Right. My apologies, but none of that applies, because you might have noticed in my talk, I said holon partons are a very special type of hierarchy. This is going to be a gestalt shift, but there's no such thing as higher and lower in a holon parton. It's always level one. So a word is in a novel, and they're both letters. Okay, think of a cell and an organ and an organism. What's more important in the hierarchy? None of them. They're all equally important. You need your cells, you need your organs, or you won't be an organism. Every single one of them is perfectly equal, perfectly important. Now, if you have a cancer cell, that needs to go, or that will destroy you as an organism. And that's what I'm talking about, is curing cultural cancer. So I know this is a hard idea. A lot of people struggle with this. Hierarchies need to be put aside because are you going to tell me that my cell is more important than my organ, that is more important than the whole organism, or that a word in a novel or a sentence in a novel or the whole novel is more important. They're all totally necessary and sufficient. Yes, you get command and control, but it's actually just scale. It's larger and smaller, Klaus. It's not higher as in I'm the boss and you're the slave. So everything you said is true about hierarchies. Like, don't get me wrong. Everything you just said about hierarchies, I totally agree with and could not agree with more. But it doesn't apply to whole-on partons is my point.
What about in the emphasizer?
What about if the individuals have different kinds of conceptions of the holons and partons?
Sure, people can do that, but people have different conceptions of E equals mc squared, and what will happen if they do? Some of them will be able to make a nuclear reactor or a bomb, and some won't, because if they have the wrong information, if it's not correct.
Well, that's not a question of wrong information. All revolutions are initially thought to be cancerous, and many of them turn out to be changing society in a positive way. So this is not so simple that the one conception is dominating the other. And I think one has to see that individuals have their own, and not just individuals, groups, cultures, develop their own conceptions and act them. And there is my problem is there is no single authority of defining it according to the theory as to what the authorities, the hierarchy. Well, you don't like to say the hierarchy, but I see hierarchies in the diagrams.
Well, there's 10 different types of hierarchies, and I've published on this, and you need to be very careful to distinguish between what kind of hierarchy. There are hierarchies in companies, and you can look at a company as a whole on parton, but you can look at it as a company hierarchy as well, which is totally different. Saying the boss is at the top, and then there's the middle managers and all the slaves down the bottom, or the workers, whatever you want to call it. That is a hierarchy, a company hierarchy. The whole on parton is not that. The whole on parton is all of them as one unit, and you would regard the boss as the homeostat inside the system, who just the decider, basically. So it's two very different things. If you think of normal hierarchies and try and overlay it onto whole on parton theory, you'll struggle, I think, because they need to be divorced as two separate, very separate. You could look at a company as a hierarchy, a management hierarchy. That's fine. Hierarchy is important, and a lot of bosses are unethical, and corporations are very unethical and causing climate change, and that's why we need the ethicizer. But you could also look at that whole company as a whole on parton, but it's very different laws and rules that are operating. So it is a tricky distinction to make. But I think you're right about hierarchies. Hierarchies are a real worry. I mean, I think, Harari has written a lot about these. Hierarchy came out sort of around the industrial and agrarian and feudal eras. Before that, they were just tribal hunter-gatherer bands with a lot of egalitarianism, like chimps and bonobos. Maybe we should go back to it. I don't know.
Lou.
See if I got my mic on. Yeah. So I'm curious about how you imagine having the ethicizer work. For example, consider January 6th. A very large number of those people felt that they were there for strong ethical reasons because the election had been stolen from their leader and they were going to make it right. And they had made an ethical decision on that basis. Of course, right. You point out that the information they had is erroneous, but how do you get people to understand in the emotions of actuality that some information should be ignored and other information should be taken seriously?
It's a brilliant question, Lou. The main thing is any information source in terms of mass media communication, individual media communication, even private messages on Facebook, etc., should be tagged by an AI that is monitoring all the information of the world. So anytime that those instructions that said our election's been stolen, let's all gather and storm the Bastille or storm the Capitol building, there would be a flashing red text over the top of that saying, you do realize this is not true. Here are the facts. Click here for the facts. And people would have better access to information that way. So that I think a lot of the problem was people believing what they were told by people they trusted, and those people weren't telling the truth. So you need something to label things as truth or lie or propaganda.
Well, how would you maintain the integrity of such a system in the face of human politics?
I put in a link that I've written a chapter in the book on this, and I put in the chat here a long blog post that goes into detail. So I would love any feedback or thoughts, because all you great thinkers, great systems and cybernetics thinkers, are exactly the kind of people I need feedback and criticism from. And be hard on me, please, because I talk like I know what I'm talking about, and I probably have no idea.
Larry, you have a question?
Thank you.
Well, let me just make a comment. It boils down again, what is the truth? And that is not so easily established when, for example, January 6th, it is not easily established. I mean, who can really observe whether was stolen or not? There's a very complicated processes, and they could be wrong, in fact. So this is not, going back to the truth means there has to be an objective reality that you can check a statement against, and that is mostly not available.
Very true, very true.
I mean, for example, I don't know whether Trump exists. I have never seen him. I've never shook hands with him. I've seen him only on television. This could be a total myth. So that is not an issue of truth. It's a question of, does it make sense what I see? And it does make sense, and I'm accepting it on that basis.
Absolutely. We take so many things in the mass media on trust. I don't know that Trump exists. He may be a robot.
That's the reason I think one should be careful not to rope the notion of truth into almost everything, and particularly if you don't like something, don't like something. Like, for example, if you don't like the outcome of the election, then you claim it to be untrue.
Yep, true.
Jamie, your last question, or maybe the wrap up conclusion.
I wanted to attempt to ground the discussion. Maybe I I don't know whether I'm successful, but I see Velikovsky using Bertrand Russell's theory of types, and that gets back to second order cybernetics, third order, and if I may say, that is where I think there's another way. So now I'm going to disagree or offer an alternative way, a switch. Dus instead of going up to having everything in the system, is to kind of really say we are switching from different paradigms. And I think that Bertrand Russell is the one at whom we should look, because he was the one who gave us the theory of types, and Popper has actually written somewhere that he had trouble understanding what Russell was talking about. And now one day it hit him, and then he came up with his argumentative function. And that actually links back to Lou's work a little bit, that he say logic is what you do with it. I think that's somehow your paradigm more than Platonic mathematical Platonism. Just what do you do with logic? And then I think everything that you say is still true, JT, but but it's not about this ethicizer that's going to give you all the decisions. It's about what's going on in the head of a human being and how he relates to the world. And I think your 3 laws are actually 3 laws of creativity, and they also should come with the don't, because you say this is what happens at this and this and this level, but you should say warning, do not do this at the hierarchical level, and do not do that when you go down, and that is where the strength of your work will be, in the warnings that you say. The I don't know what they call it, counterfactuals, or don't do this, because there are bad unintended consequences.
Right. Thank you, Jamie. And thank you, Jason, and everyone.
Okay.
So much.
I thought we
Right.
would be half an hour more, but we